Although the 15th Amendment to the Constitution prohibited the denial of the right to vote based on race, Black voters faced barriers to voting immediately.
One example is, for a long time, the way that jurisdictions prevented Black people from voting is by preventing them from being able to register in the first place. And after that, a new form of discrimination evolved, election systems that effectively made the votes that they cast meaningless compared to white voters through gerrymandered districts. And so that's just one way in which every time Black voters or voters of color find a way to participate in the political process, they're met with new forms of discrimination. The Federal Voting Rights Act was really designed, with preclearance in mind in particular, to prevent that from occurring. It's a policy that required jurisdictions with a history of discrimination to submit any changes to their voting policies or election methods to a federal court or to the Department of Justice to be reviewed for whether they discriminate against people of color based on race.
There are a lot of benefits of a preclearance program. Most importantly, preclearance was one of the most effective laws in our nation's history. It protected millions upon millions of voters against racial discrimination in voting. There were actually over 1,000 proposed changes that were blocked by the preclearance program, and this was all because the preclearance program under the Federal Voting Rights Act provided the robust protections that voters of color need and deserve to prevent racial discrimination in voting from taking effect in the first place.
You can actually see the tremendously successful effect that preclearance had by looking at what happened after the Supreme Court effectively gutted the program.
In 2013, the Supreme Court decided that the way that jurisdictions were determined to be covered by federal preclearance was unconstitutional. As a result, it effectively gutted the preclearance provision of the Voting Rights Act.
This was a truly devastating opinion. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in her dissent in the Shelby County opinion, famously said that getting rid of preclearance was like throwing out your umbrella in the middle of a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. And her words proved, unfortunately, to be all too true. We saw the return of significant discriminatory voting policies and practices that preclearance had kept at bay for decades upon decades.
There's a common misconception that the Shelby County decision struck down preclearance itself, but it didn't. It actually just struck down the coverage formula that underlies preclearance, making it effectively inoperable. That means that states and the federal government, in fact, are permitted to enact preclearance programs.
New York and Connecticut have passed State Voting Rights Act laws that include preclearance programs, and other localities are considering doing the same.
Through state-level preclearance programs, localities like counties and towns that are at a high risk for voting discrimination submit key voting changes to a state authority for review before these changes can go into effect. The reviewer could be a state agency like the Attorney General or Secretary of State, a court, or another body with relevant expertise. They provide an expert set of eyes to make sure proposed voting changes don't discriminate based on race.
So a state preclearance program could work like this. Let's say a town was considering moving a polling place from a Black neighborhood across town, but doing so would require the Black voters to travel long distances to get to another polling place, or would require them to wait in long lines in the remaining locations near them. That proposed change would likely be struck down by the reviewing body, and the town would have to either appeal that decision or come up with a new plan for the location change that would serve all voters fairly.
There's a framework to identify jurisdictions within the state. For instance, most states cover jurisdictions that have committed a violation involving the right to vote. In some states, jurisdictions can be covered by severe racial disparities in political participation. You see severe racial disparities in voter turnout, that's a sign that something's happening in that jurisdiction that's problematic, and voting changes should get a close look before they can go into effect.
Preclearance is not a punishment for local jurisdictions. They get a ton of benefits out of having really an extra pair of eyes at the state level to assess, to analyze their voting policies and determine whether they have a discriminatory effect. Oftentimes, local governments really don't have the resources to be doing a constant evaluation of every voting policy that they're considering for racial impact. But the state has those resources, and preclearance really allows the state to marshal those resources where they're needed.
You know the old expression, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's why preclearance is so important, because it prevents changes from going into effect and prevents the need for prolonged and costly litigation to address those problems. The federal VRA has long been seen as the most significant civil rights achievement in our nation's history. I believe that a state VRA can be the most significant civil rights achievement that any state legislature could accomplish for voters in their state. State VRAs provide sweeping and robust protections for the right to vote, and there is such interest in state VRAs right now at this critical moment. Many well-intentioned leaders at the state level are interested in finding robust protections against racial discrimination in voting.
Thanks for watching LDF and CAP's State Voting Rights Act's Video Explainer series. In this video, our experts discussed how state voting rights acts can address harmful policies by adopting preclearance provisions.
To learn more about the essential components of state voting rights acts and how they can help us build an inclusive, multiracial democracy, check out our websites and follow along with this Video Explainer series.